In this video, you'll learn a deeper understanding of the Dart programming language, Flutter, and its components, so you have a good foundation for the rest of this series. Hi guys, welcome to Copwork, where you'll learn to code apps, websites, backends, and games. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and everything mentioned in this video will be linked in the description. So let's dive right in this series, where you'll learn a deeper understanding of the Dart language and Flutter. To make sure that you have a good foundation in your adventure of becoming a Flutter developer, you'll need a solid understanding of how Flutter works and what basic widgets are to structure your layout. You'll also need an understanding of Flutter's lifecycle, so you know when to fetch data, when to discard it again, and when to react to certain events. But first, I'll go over Dart, which is the programming language in which Flutter is built, so that you're able to better read and understand the code that I'll be showing you guys. So Flutter is made in Dart, which is a programming language created by Google. To start out with making Flutter apps, you'll need to know a bit about Dart first. So we'll go over the basic language features so you know what you're doing when we're going to start developing in Flutter. Because I want you guys to have a good understanding of what you're typing instead of just copying code from the video. So as you open dartpad.dev, which will be linked down in the description, you'll see the main function. This is essentially where Dart will start running your code. So you can remove this bit because we'll go over those features of the language later. And the first thing that's useful to learn is the print function. The print function basically prints whatever you put into it to the console. So let's say I'll write print hello world. It's gonna print it out to the console. It's useful for debugging your app and to just see what's going on in your app in general. Make sure that if you write text that you're gonna write it within these quotes so that Dart will recognize it as text. To write numbers, you can just write them without the quotes. Like that. So now that you know how print works, we can move over to variables. Dart has a few basic types for variables, which are strings, booleans, numbers, lists, and maps. But we'll first go over the string variable. So in order to create a string in Dart, you can write string with a capital S, give it a name, and then assign it with a string variable like this. And make sure to close your lines with a semicolon, as it is required in Dart. We can now go ahead and print this string and run it. As you can see, it prints out text right there. So Dart also has booleans, which you'll write with a lowercase b. I'll just name this one test bool, right, like this, equals true. I print that out. Dart also has numbers. Numbers and Darts are pretty interesting because we have integers, doubles, and nums. I'll go over nums in a sec. Integers are essentially what you expect them to be. They are whole numbers. So let's say 10. In this case, test number. Print that one out as well. We have doubles. Test double 1.0. Let's actually rename this one to test int, since that's easier, since we also have a nums. Test int, test double. Let's print that one out as well. Test double. So the num type in Dart is actually pretty interesting, as it will decide whether it's going to be an integer or a double by itself. So let's go test num1. Let's make two of these. Let's assign this one with a 1 and print that one out. Test num1. And a num can also be a double. 2. So in this case, we'll do 1.1 and then print that one out as well. Test num2, like that. All right. So let's run this real quick. All right. So as you can see, it prints out text, true, 10, 1, 1, and 1.1. Let's make this double. 1.1 as well, actually, just for the sake of it. It's a bit more clear. Yeah, like that. So now you can see the 10 is the integer. This is a double, integer, and a double. And yeah, that's something to keep note of, that nums can be both doubles and integers. So Dart has lists for arrays. You can create them using the list class. Let's create a list of strings like this. Strings equals this. This is how you initialize an empty array in Dart. And let's add some items to it. So let's say text1, strings.add text2. So you can loop through the list by either using the for each function or by writing a for loop. So like you use in most languages. Let's write int y 0, y is smaller than strings.length, which is the way to get the length of an array in Dart. Go y++, and then let's see, print strings y. But this should compile just fine. Like that. So that's how you use arrays in Dart. Dart also has maps. You can create one by typing the keyword, the class map. Let's make a map of strings like that. Map equals map like this. And then let's add something to that map. Test1 equals test1, and then map test2 equals, let's do to test, and also one test for this one so we can differentiate easier. Then let's access those variables from the map. Let's go map test1 and print map test2. Now you can also loop through the map by using the for each function like this, and then create an anonymous function in that, which we'll go over later, by the way. Key value, and printing them out like this. But let's just keep it simple for now, and just print the variables individually. So like this, you'll get, yeah, like this, one test and two tests out of the map. So these are basically your basic types in Dart, and kind of how you use them. It's pretty similar to most languages, but yeah, definitely something to play around with a little. Again, dartpad.dev, which is where you can try out all these language features. And let's now go over the different types of variables that you can have in Dart. So yeah, feel free to pause this or go back if you don't fully understand the basic variables yet. But for now, let's move on to the different types of variables that you can have in Dart. So Dart has 4 types of variables. You have nullable variables, constant variables, final variables, and late variables. So let's create one of each, and then I'll explain what every one of these does. So a nullable string, to make one, you just add a question mark, and as the name kind of says it, it's a nullable string. So let's name it nullable string equals, let's just make it null for now. That's kind of what nullable does. You can make a constant string like this. A constant string is a string that you can initialize once, but not change afterwards. Let's say let's also make a final string like this. Final string equals final, like that. And kind of the difference between a final string and a constant string is a final string, you can assign once, but internal properties of this string can still change. So let's say if you were to like remove a character like n for let's say in a later stage, this would still work on a final string, but with constant strings, they are completely immutable. So that means that you cannot change anything after initializing it. And then there's also a late variable. So let's make a late string, and let's not initialize that, because the point of a late string is by adding the late keyword, you promise the language that you're going to initialize it before the scope exits. So let's say here in the void main, we're going to have to initialize this string once, like this, late. And let's print them all out right here. So nullable string print const string print final string. And let's print the late string as well. And so essentially this should print all the variables like that. So the first string is null, then we have the const string, the final string, and the late string as we initialize them here. But if we were to, for example, comment out the late string, so it wouldn't be initialized, it's going to give us an error because because Dart really wants it to be initialized, because you promise it by giving it the late keyword. And by giving it the late keyword, it's going to trust you that you're going to initialize it. And if you don't, you're going to have to make a nullable string and make it null by default, because until you initialize it, the language doesn't know what variable this is. So that's important for a late string. Let's move over to functions. In Dart, functions are pretty basic. So let's create a function right here that prints something out. So let's say void hello, like this. Let's print hello. Let's call it from here like this. So this function will print out hello. As for arguments with functions, so let's create an argument like this. It's pretty easy in Dart. Just create it like you would create a variable, and let's pass it here and print it out as well. But what's awesome about arguments for functions in Dart is that you can also use named arguments. And what that means is essentially that if you were to write it like this with between curly braces, and let's say we have an int b, then we'd have to essentially specify that argument right here. So b is 20. So let's also print b here. But what's important with named argument is that they need a default value, or you need to make them nullable. So like right now, by default, it's going to be null. Or in this case, you can say equals 0, which will also, of course, work for the normal variables. So then you don't have to specify the variable at all to call the function. But for named variables, they always need a default value, so that when you don't use them, they won't take up any space. So like this, it's going to print 10 and 20, but we can also fully remove this like this. And then it's going to print 10, 0 like this. It's going to use the default value. If we don't supply that default value, a compiler error will be thrown that shows us that we need to provide it of a default value. So like I said, you could also make it nullable, which will essentially print out null by default. Like this. You don't have to require a non-named argument. You can also just have it just use named arguments like this. So print that out. It's going to be null by default, and then we can supply a named argument b. Say it's 22 like this. Run it. And it's going to print out 22. So it's pretty good, cool language feature about Dart. I really like that. As for returning values, you could just change the void type to a type you want to return. So let's say I want to return a string. So let's say return hello here. And then we can also print hello like this. So we could print out the return value of that function. Oh, make sure to use a capital S with strings. Now run it. Oh, little typo right there. Just like that. It's gonna print out hello. Oh, spelled that. It's gonna print out hello. And then there's also anonymous functions in Dart. So anonymous function is basically a function without a name. You can also store it in variables. So let's say we're gonna make an anonymous function that returns a piece of text. So let's print that one out. You're gonna use parentheses like these, and then the curly braces like so. Make sure to add a semicolon, and also call the function right here. So it looks a bit strange. And let's say return hello anonymous, like that. This should also compile just fine. See, like this. You can even pass arguments to that. So let's say we'd have to want an appendix for this one. Appendix, let's say spacebar plus appendix. In here, we could also supply that variable. So let's say 1, 2, 3. This should also work just fine. And that's kind of how anonymous functions work. You can also store anonymous functions in variables. So let's say we want to store this function in a variable before calling it, so we can call it afterwards. We'd say a string, because it's a string function, and give it the arguments it has. So in this case, it's a string. So if we were to have an integer like this, then we also need to type here int. So let's say hello func equals the function like this, and then we can then use it as a variable hello func and just call it like this. Let's call it 2 times clarity like this, and maybe we have to say to string first here, so we can convert the integer to a string. Now let's pass the argument here as well, say 10 or 11 like this. But it won't compile because we're not printing it. Well, it will compile, but it won't print something out because we're not printing it. So let's print this like this. Hello func, like that. And this should essentially do the same thing. So that's how you store anonymous functions in a variable. This could be useful for callbacks, so buttons. So you can give it a on-click callback, for example. And now let's go over to if statements. So in Dart, if statements are pretty similar as in other languages. So you just, let's make a bool. Statement equals false. So let's say if statement print yes, and else print no. So when it's true, it's going to print yes, and when it's false, it's going to print no, like this. You see it prints false, prints no. So let's make it true again, and it's going to print yes. As for classes in Dart, with object-oriented programming, you can write class. Let's make class animal. And let's make it so that this animal can speak. Let's make a function speak like this. And print out speak animal sounds. Like that. So now we can make a new animal. So let's say animal equals animal. Now let's make it speak. That's how you create classes and for constructors and variables. So let's say this animal has a name. So let's give it a name. and then give it a constructor. So to make a constructor in Dart, we're going to type animal again, this, and we're going to tell Dart to require this variable. So it's going to be a required variable, required this dot name, like this. And now when you make an animal, it's going to mandate you to give it a name. So let's say Peter. Oh, don't forget a semicolon. And then maybe even use it here in the print. So let's say name plus like this. Oh, we have to, of course, give it a name because it's the named argument. So you have to type name as well. If you if this were to not be a named argument, so if you just like we discussed with the functions, then you just remove the curly braces and required keyword like this. And this will also work. But in Flutter, you're mostly going to be using named arguments. So let's just stick to that for constructors for now. And you can also inherit from these classes. So if you were to make different types of animals, let's say a dog, you can say extends animal. And then this would also need to copy that constructor over. So say string name, and then dog required this dot name. Let's say super this dot name, like this. This should also work. So let's make it dog now. Dog dot speak. Give it the name Peter the dog. See. You have to make sure that you type name as well, so, like this. Oh, of course, you don't need to add this. Here you go. A dog named Peter the dog. And then we can do the same for a cat. So let's make a class cat and make them both do different things. So let's say extends animal like this. Let's copy this over real quick. It's a cat. Then run this. So let's also make a cat. So cat is cat with a name. Joseph. Cat. Say cat.speak. Like this. And so right now they both do the same thing because the function is declared here. But we can also override the function. Let's go here and say override speak. Then print name plus set the cat. Then it should override that method when calling it right here. And like you'd expect, it now says set the cat. So that's how you can override functions, which is something you're going to be using a lot in Flutter as well. And essentially in object-oriented programming in general. So this is something that's pretty useful to know. Then there's also the super keyword. So I've been using it here as well. So super is basically how you call your upper class. So if we were to call super.speak from the cat class, it's going to call the speak method in the animal class. So like this, when we run that, it should do the same thing again. We can also add extra functionality to this. So let's say the cat coughs after every sentence, and we can make a cat cough after every sentence like this. So Joseph the cat, animal sound, cough, like that. So that's essentially how inheritance works in Dart. And this is it basically for all you know all you need to know about the Dart language to properly work with Flutter. Feel free to go over this a few times, maybe play around in Dartpad yourself to kind of get the hang of the language. And once you're ready with that, you can continue with the rest of this video where we'll explain a bit about Flutter, and in the next episode we'll actually go over some layouts. So here we are back in our Flutter app that we created in the last video. This is still the sample project that you start with, but right off the bat, now that you know a bit more about the Dart language, you'll immediately recognize the main function, which we used in our Dart patches now. So we now know that this is where your application will start. So that will also mean if we print our hello world here, that's the first thing that's going to be printed to the console when we run our application. So let's hit F5 real quick to check that out. And you're going to have to make sure that your emulator is launched. So if it isn't, make sure to click here and select on start your device. It's going to list your device that you created last time and during this tutorial, or any device. And before you press F5 or run, make sure that the right target device is selected. Make sure that your emulator is running. If it's not, make sure to start it from this list. And if it's running, you can select it right here. And then when you build your application, it's going to start up again. So as soon as your application has started, down here in the debug console, you should immediately see your hello world text that we printed here right before the run app function. And we know that because this is before the run app function, it's going to be the first thing that's going to happen in our application. And so the first thing that it's going to print out is the hello world. And after that, it's going to call a function run app, which is a built-in function from Flutter that will essentially build our layout and create our app. So down here we have the my app class, which is a stateless widget. Flutter actually consists out of two types of widgets. We have stateless widgets and stateful widgets. A stateless widget is a widget that has a layout that doesn't change at all. So for example, text that doesn't change, or just a button that doesn't change, a layout that stays the same throughout the entire life cycle of your app. So in this stateless widget, we override the build function, which is where we'll create our layout. And in this case, in the example app, it's going to return a material app. And that's basically a built-in thing from Flutter that's going to allow you to create material layouts out of the box like this. It has a title, it has a theme and colors that's going to help you automatically assign colors to your basic layout, so to buttons and stuff like that. We're going to go into this more deeply in the next video. And down here, it's going to define or ask you for the home page, which is going to be the first page that's going to show you when you start your app. So it's going to create a home page and pass a title into it. And when you scroll down here, you can say that the home page is created here as well. And the home page is a stateful widget. This is because when you open a demo app, you can see it's going to have a little counter here. And when you press that button, it's going to increase the text. So in order to be able to make it in Flutter that this text changes, you're going to need to make a stateful widget. So that's why the home page is a stateful widget. And a stateful widget is a little bit different from a stateless widget. Instead of having a build method immediately, you're going to have to create a state for it. So down here, you can see that there's a state class made for the homepage widget. So we have my homepage and my homepage state. And right here, it's going to create that state. And in the state itself is where your widget build layout is going to be. So right here is the exact same method that you have in the stateless widget right here. only in this case it's in the state instead of in the widget itself. And in here you can see it's going to build a scaffold and an app bar. Well, the app bar is the first thing you're going to actually visually see in your app. It's the app bar right on top here, and it accepts the title, which is in your widget. So on here it's going to it has a constructor, which we saw earlier, where it requires the title. The variable is right here. And it's going to be passed right here. So if we change this, for example, page 1, and hit Ctrl S to save it, it's going to sync it to the device, and right here you're going to immediately see the change. So that's the first thing you can see on screen, and below that is the body of the app. That's the white screen here. It's everything in here, and there's a column in there, which we'll go over in another video. And in there you have the text and the counter with the value of the counter. So the key difference here between a stateful widget and a stateless widget is in the stateful widget, we're able to call a function called setState. This function is available here, but it's not available when we go, for example, to the stateless widget. So in the stateless widget, if we were to type setState, it's not going to exist because it's a stateless widget. But down here in the stateful widget, if you were to type setState, it's going to recognize it, and it's a valid thing to do. So the function increment counter here is linked to the button that you saw on screen. So if you scroll down here, they have a floating action button. It's going to increment the counter. Right here, you can also play around with it a little if you'd like by changing the icon. So for example, now it's an add icon, but you can also create a home icon, for example. Then it's going to be a little house like that. And so the setState function right here is basically what tells Flutter to rebuild your entire widget. So if we were to remove the setState part, so let's just comment this out entirely and just say counter plus plus, which will increase it by 1. Whenever we were to press this button, it's not going to increase anymore, because when you call the setState function, the entire layout below here, so this function will be called again, and your layout will be rebuilt. And in here, Flutter will insert the counter, the updated counter variable into your text widget. So if we were to save this again, and now see, it immediately rebuilt your layout. And when you click it, you'll see that it's gonna update the variable. So that's kind of the key difference between stateful and stateless widgets. And that's kind of the most important thing in Flutter that you're gonna need to understand, because that's what all your layouts are gonna consist of. So that's it for this video. In this video, we mostly went over the Dart language and how Flutter is structured in general. In the next video, we're actually gonna play around with a few widgets and see what it actually is gonna do to your layout, so that you're actually gonna be able to make a bit of an app. Yeah, so that's all for now. Thank you so much for watching. If this video was helpful for you, make sure to hit that like button. And if you have any remarks or questions, leave a comment down below. Also make sure to subscribe so you get notified for future videos. And I'll see you guys in the next video.